Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. All right. So we have a very interesting and a very important sutta found within the Pali Canon, and also sutra which goes into the detail of one of the most variedly defined parts of Dhamma that is found within the Tripitaka, and that is the prapanchas. And I'm sure this word prapancha is something that we have all at one point of our Buddhist study. Even within just meditation, it is something that we surely have come across to some extent. This talk today is this session today is would require you to really contemplate on how you would perceive. That is very important, and I'm going to start by directing your attention to that point first. When you are going through and listening to what I am saying today, bring your mind to how would you contemplate, how would you get to know, how would you observe an object? Because that is where the key is to understand, or try to understand. We will not fully understand it as yet, but getting close to what a prapancha, or how it would essentially operate in our mind. To understand that, it is important to always come to your mind, right? Always come to your mind. All right, let's start. So let's turn to page number 106. The link is available on our website. So page number 106. The discourse on the honey ball. Thus have I heard. At one time, the Blessed One was staying in Nigrodha's park near Kapilavatthu in the Sakya country. Then in the morning, the Blessed One, having dressed himself and taking robe and bowl, entered Kapilavatthu for alms. Then the Blessed One, having gone into Kapilavatthu for alms, having returned from alms round and finished his meal, went into Mahavana, the great forest, and sat down at Bilva tree for his noonday rest. Then Dandapani, the Sakya, right? The Sakya. Now, what is the reason that in the sutras they sort of emphasize? Normally, usually when a Sakya comes, it is usually announced Dandapani the Sakya, right? Gautama the Sakya, Siddhartha the Sakya, right? Suddhodana the Sakya. Why is this? This is because to notify of the conditioned ego which is going to come with this person. If a Sakya comes into the play, there is some sort of ego play there, right? And here within the sutta, you find Dandapani the Sakya to say this is a fellow who had a lot of ego, right? So that is a bit of the humor found within the sutras. So let's see. Who was walking about on a stroll. Now, Dandapani is an interesting character, right? Dandapani, since he was young, Dandapani was a person who walked around with a aid in his hand. Although he could walk properly, he would have this sort of, we won't call it a stick, what would be the proper word to use? A sort of a, like the old people, how they would sort of, when they can't walk, right? Like a walker, right? So that he was using this and he was walking around. Why? Because again, the ego, right? The conceited
Yeah,
nature
dude.
that
So,
Dandapani, the conceited nature that Dandapani had, right? Who was walking about on a stroll, also went into Mahabana and went up to the Bilva tree, where the Blessed One was. Then Dandapani and Sakya went up to the Blessed One, exchanged greetings with him. When this courteous and friendly exchange was concluded, he stood at one side and leaned on to his stick. Now, he stood at one side. Usually, you don't stand because the Buddha is sitting, right? Usually, you do not stand because why? The Buddha is sitting, right? That is disrespectful, right? He stood, and above that, he didn't just stand. He leaned onto his stick, which is even worse, right? Which is even worse, right? He was leaning his body weight onto the stick that he was holding. And it is actually said, if a person in the Vinaya, if a person is holding his footwear, right, a stick, right, there are a couple of things actually. For stick footwear, I wonder whether food is there as well. I think food is also included. In the Vinaya Pitaka, it is said we are not supposed to preach to these people, right? So you're not supposed to teach Dhamma to a person who's holding a stick or something. Um, which is in tradition, usually, I mean, if you're holding footwear, I mean, it is quite, even an umbrella, yes, even an umbrella, Susan, yes, even an umbrella, you are not supposed to preach Dhamma. Why? Because it is disrespectful, right? A person is already enacting a motion of disrespect. When that is so, you're not supposed to teach Dhamma. Why? The value of Dhamma is reduced, right? The value of Dhamma is reduced. Hence, the Buddha teaches the monks not to preach the Dhamma, right? Not to preach the Dhamma. Now, I'm going to warn everyone with the cameras off. If you're having your cameras off and you're doing something around the house, right? Don't do that for this sutta today because it is an absolutely uh, important sutta, right? Which will need your attention. So this is not a sutta that you can just sort of, you need to really put your mind into it. We are just getting into the introduction at the moment, right? So focus. Yeah. All right. Okay, there are we. Dandapani the Sakya went up to the Buddha, exchanged greetings with him. When this courteous and friendly exchange was concluded, he stood at one side, leaned onto his stick. Leaning thus on his stick, he asked the Buddha, right? Leaning onto the stick, he asked the Buddha, what does the recluse say? what, what does the recluse teach? I think you can sort of picture this sort of in your mind, right? You can picture this sort of in your mind. We have this sort of pattern of speaking in our Sinhalese culture very much, and even actually Asian culture. දැන් මොකක්ද කියන්නේ? This is the same thing. This is the same thing, right? So you can imagine what the scenario was at the time, right? What the scenario would have been like at the time when this exchange was happening, right? Now you see in this part, this is, right? We'll read it first. Also, I say and teach in a way so not to quarrel with anyone in this world, with its God, with its gods, its maras, and its Brahmins. this is a sarcasm of the Buddha, right? This is a sarcasm of the Buddha. In a way, the Buddha is really giving him a tokka, right? A hit on his head, right? In a way, this is to say, look here, I am also a Sakya, right? This is a teaching technique of the Buddha, which he uses, which actually we come into, which we have seen being used with a lot of the kings, with a lot of his own people, right? With a lot of his own people. So this is the way the Buddha starts. I say and teach in such a way so as not to quarrel with anyone in this world. Now, he knows Dandapani is approaching a subject which he wants to quarrel over. That is where Dandapani, the name Dandapani, Danda is punishment, violence. That's the name, meaning of the name. The name is given to him because he is a usual person who is known to sort of quarrel and sort of engage in violence, right? Maybe not physically, but even through sort of conversation and debate, right? The Buddha, knowing this, he says, I teach a path which is the practice of not quarreling with people of the world. It's gods, it's maras, and it's brahmas. Now, this is the first sort of the riddle the Buddha has in the doctrine here. How does one, now remember, the Buddha is speaking to Dandapani, who is a mundane person, right? You can disturb or you can interrupt anytime, unmute your mic, or just put any questions you have on the chat section if you have any questions. So how the Buddha is speaking to a mundane person who is Dandapani. And he's referring to gods, maras, and brahmins. How does a mundane person, without any meditative achievement and attainment, right, communicate or have anything to do with a god, a mara, and a brahmin? What does this mean? What does this mean? It takes us to what do these people represent? What does a god represent? A god represents, meaning a being who has been born in such a state due to trihetuka, or wholesome actions rooted in the three roots of goodness: non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. Because of this, you have been born as a deity. It is not referring to deities as typically we would. It is referring to what a deity represents. That's important to note. What does a Mara represent? What does a Mara represent? What do you think a Mara represents? Dil? Shriyani, yes?
Lobha, dosha, moha?
Yes, I mean, Lobha. Lobha, of course, it has to be that, but it's specific. Yes.
But you get maras in Paranimita Basmata and you get in higher realms also, Nukanti?
Yes, this Mara, but Maras, remember the book? I think there was a lovely small book, the hordes of Mara, I think, the army of Mara. There are 5 Maras, 5 sort of armies of Mara, which represents the 5 hindrances, right? So who is a person, right? This is an important point in the sutta. Who is a person who is able to not quarrel with Mara then? Who is a person who is not able to quarrel with Mara?
Somebody who has realized and doesn't have those.
Who is a person who realizes? Who is a person who realizes? Is it us?
No. Then somebody who has gone over the defilements and who has realized.
Arahant.
It's the Buddhi Arahants.
Yes. Not Buddha. Yes. without the hindrances.
Right. So it is referring here to a person who can or is an arahant. Then the Brahmas. These are people who live suppressing the defilements, right? Meaning people who have not reached the state but live in the practice or with the practice, right? Who does not quarrel with these three persons means a person who has achieved enlightenment, right? Just in your handouts or something, just make a mental note of this sentence, because this sentence comes in handy as we move on to Prapancha. This generation, with its reclusers and Brahmins, its rulers and people, and in such a way that perceptions no more lie latent in that Brahmin. Now it's coming. What is he saying? Where the latent tendencies, the anusayas, those which facilitate, support, and egg on all that is bad or rather unwholesome within us, or the patent, actually that is wrong if I say that, because if we say why is that wrong, can you think of why that is wrong, why what I just said is wrong? Because if we say the bad within us, we are talking about a self. It should actually be the potential of bad, because then there is no self, right? Then there is no self. Lie latent. So not supporting that which is the anusaya or the latent tendencies, right? Latent tendencies. A Brahma is one who has destroyed, so it's referring to an Arahant, right? Who abides detached from sensual pleasures, free from doubt, having cut off worry, free from craving of any kind of existence. This is what I say also, this is what I teach. When this was spoken, Dandapani, the Sakya, shook his head, wagged his tongue, raised his eyebrows until there were 3 furrows in his brow, meaning he was raising his eyebrows, so he had the sort of the wrinkles, the lines, and then leaning on his stick, left. He couldn't believe, he did not expect the Buddha to give the answer that he did. He thought it would have been much more shallow than what the Buddha mentioned. So he left. That was the brief teaching that the Buddha gave, right? That was the brief teaching that the Buddha gave. Moving on. Then when it was evening, Blessed One rose from his retreat, went to Nigrodha Park, and sat down on the prepared seat. Thus seated, the Blessed One addressed the monks. Now, bhikkhus, in the morning, I, having dressed myself, and now he's explaining that whole scenario. He's explaining that he dressed himself, he went on his arms to Kapilavatthu. Having returned from alms round, finished my meal, went into Mahabana, sat down under Bilva tree for my noon rest. Then Dandapani the Sakya, who was walking, now he repeats that whole discussion, everything that happened to the Sangha, right? The Sangha does not ask the Buddha questions, right? Now that was the description that the Buddha gave with regard to the Prapanchas. The bhikkhus think, now who is the person who is suitable for us to go and ask questions about what the Buddha has now said, right? We'll come down to para 8, right? The 7 latent tendencies. Bhikkhus, as regards the source from which proliferation of concept and perception, prapancha sanya sankha, that is the Pali word. Now that Pali word is one of the most difficult words within the Tripitaka to really define. There have been so many definitions, and bhikkhus, scholars are still trying to define that word, right? So we will come to that, but we'll finish reading this, right? Assails a person. If one were to find nothing there to delight in, nothing there to welcome, nothing to cling to. I'm going to read that again. Listen, right? Because as regards to the source, as regards to the source, that is important. That's an important word there. The source, right? From which, the source from which proliferation of conceptions and perception, proliferation of conception and perception assails a person. If one were to find nothing there, if one were to find nothing there to delight in, nothing there to welcome, nothing to cling to, this is the end of. Now, if you have a handout, a paperback in your hand, please mark that with a star or something, because that's a very important para, right? That is basically the guidance to get rid of the prapanchas. That's a very important para, right? We are going to come to it. The latent tendency. Now, what are the latent tendencies? This is the end of the latent tendency of lust, right? Latent tendency. Now, latent tendency is anusaya. Latent tendency of lust, latent tendency of aversion, latent tendency of views, latent tendency of doubt, latent tendency of conceit, desire for existence, and latent tendency for ignorance. Who does not know what latent tendency is? If you put your hand up or something, I will explain, or else I will move on. Okay. Now, when it comes to the kilesas, right? When it comes to the defilements, defilements are segmented into three parts, right? Which is latent tendencies, which is anusaya. Then we have vitikama kilesa, right? Which are the kilesas or the hindrances which arises through the latent tendencies, grows or becomes powerful to an extent where it now appears in the mind, but nothing further. It's only in the mind, right? It's only in the mind. Then we have the paryuttana kilesas. Paryuttana, I have actually forgotten the English words, but I will explain what it is. Paryuttana is now the kilesa has arose in your anusaya through the latent tendency to the vitikama, to the mind. And from the mind, now the kilesa continues to grow to an extent where now you express it through bodily or verbal intimation. Meaning you are, for example, you are angry at something, right? You are angry at something. The anger has arisen in your mind. Through the mind, now that anger keeps on growing, that now you have to express it through verbal or bodily means. Anusaya is the foundation or the structure in mind which allows for the potential of unwholesome to exist within your nama and rupa. Right? Why do I say within nama and rupa? You might say, Bhante, it's just nama, not rupa. Remember, kammaja rupa, chittada rupa, utuja rupa. Right? What happens now when you are angry? You can see it in your face. If you are a person who gets angry often, if you are a person who, you will see it in your face. A person who is very happy, you will see that brightness in that person, a glow in that person, right? A person who sort of revels in the defilements will sort of grow older faster. You can see the aging very easily, right? That now see the effect of anger upon the body. That is a chitta rupa, kammaja rupa, and uttuja rupa, right? Meaning the materiality which arises depending on consciousness, chitta the rupa, kamma depending on kamma, and depending on utu. Utu is, what is the word translation of utu?
Seasonal. Is it?
Kriya.
Sorry?
It's the atmospheric conditions actually.
It is,
Yeah.
but that is not the word. You know,
Okay.
because utu can, literally refers to, it can be the weather, it can be the temperature, it can be
Is it the Ritu? Ritu?
Ritu.
No.
Irtu.
Ritu, yes. Ritu.
Yeah.
Anyways, I think we
Yeah.
get the point.
Condition.
Remember the
Ritu
English
is
term, let me know.
Yeah.
Let us know. Okay. So that is what latent tendency is. Latent tendencies is the foundation for the akusala to arise in our mind. Right? We'll stop at that. Is there are the schools of debate which asks or says, you know, there is, would there be wholesome, would there be wholesome anusaya or wholesome latent tendencies? No, there is no wholesome latent tendencies. We are not going to go into that discussion, right? Then what did the bhikkhus do? This is the ending of the taking up of the rod and sword, quarrels, dispute, mayhem, slandering, and lying. Here, these evil, unwholesome states ceases without remainder. When one takes away the prapancha, one takes away the potential for unwholesome to arise, right? Then we come to Mahakachayana, right? The bhikkhus, having discussed who is the person that we can go to further understand what the Buddha mentioned in brief. Then the bhikkhus decide, you know, Venerable Kaccayana is the person that the Buddha says is really able to expound upon a brief sermon of the Buddha. So let's go to Mahakaccayana. The bhikkhus go to Mahakaccayana and says to Mahakaccayana, they relate the whole admonition the Buddha had given regarding the prapancha and asks him to explain it. Then Venerable Mahakaccayana, let's come all the way down to para, just before para 11, right? Just before para 11. The Venerable Mahakassapa is praised by the teacher and held in high esteem by wise companions in the holy life. He would be capable of giving the detailed meaning of this teaching, given in brief, whose meaning is not given in detail by the Blessed One. Let us approach the Venerable Mahakaccayana and question Mahakaccayana over and over again regarding this manner. This is meaning counter questioning, right? Over and over again. This is to say how it questioning was welcome in the culture of the Sangha, right? You are not supposed to just believe just because even an elder monk says so. Then the monks approached the Venerable Mahakaccayana and exchanged greetings with him. When this courteous and friendly exchange was concluded, they sat down at one side, seated thus at one side. They said to this Venerable Mahakaccayana, also Kaccayana, this is what the Blessed One said. Let's go all the way down to the heartwood parable. Right now, heartwood is the middle, the aratua of a tree. It is usually what we would usually cut down a tree for, right? The heartwood. Also, just as a person needing heartwood, seeking heartwood, wandering in search of heartwood, After passing over the root and trunk of a great tree that stands full of hardwood, were to think that hardwood would be found amongst its branches and leaves, even so it has come to this venerable sirs, even so it is with you that you think. So what happened? Venerable Mahakatchana says, you went seeking for hardwood. But why didn't you ask? Meaning, what he is meaning is, you had the Buddha with you, who is the foremost, right? For also the Blessed One knows the known, sees the seen. He is the I, he is knowledge, he is knowledge. He is Dhamma, he is Brahma, he is instructor of the spiritual duties, the shower of meanings, the giver of deathless, the Lord of truth, the Tathagata. Yet, having that, you have come to the branches and the leaves, right? Which is such a loving statement. If you know, which is an absolutely loving statement, right? I think, being a student and being a teacher myself, we always, we try to sort of do better. We always try to sort of do better than the teacher, or try to explain it better than the teacher, right? But if you take this enlightened being with the profession of being able to expound upon a base or a small, short principle of Dhamma in the most best way, second to the Buddha, right? You see that love and that connection the Sangha had with the Buddha, right? That is a very inspiring sentence there, right? Then we come to this term, right? Where Venerable Katchayana says, having the Buddha, you could have asked him, but you have come to this, a person who is much, much more weaker, right? Bring your attention to the term, the instructor's spiritual duties. What does this mean? Who is the instructor? What is spiritual duty? Spiritual duty. What's the duty? Duty is something that you have to do. It is your responsibility and duty to do it. Then what is a spiritual duty? A spiritual duty is, in spirituality, something that you must do, right? Vatta pavatta, which means this is a duty that you must do. What is that in terms of spirituality? The Four Noble Truths. Right? That is what it's referring to. That is what it's referring to, right? The Four Noble Truths. The show of meaning, the giver of deathless. The giver of deathless means the one who teaches the path leading to Nibbana, deathless, right? The Lord of Truth, the Tathagata, right? Moving on. Okay. That was indeed the time when you should have asked, moving on to the sutra, all of that. Let's come down to Mahakatchayana's response. That whole paragraph up until Mahakatchayana's response is Venerable Mahakatchayana's admiration of the Buddha and the Buddha's qualities, right? Move down to Mahakatchayana's response, please. Para 40. In that case, listen now, so pay close attention to it, I will speak. Yes, Bhante, the monks replied. The Venerable Mahakatchayana, the Venerable Mahakatchana said thus also. The Blessed One rose from his seat, entered his dwelling after giving only a teaching in brief without giving its meaning in detail. Let's visit the teaching again so that now we are arriving at the crux of the sutra. So let's get this idea back into our heads again. Right now, everyone focus, please. Bhikkhus, as regards the source from which a proliferation of concept and perception assails a person. First of all, what is proliferation? Proliferation is when something very quickly increases, rapidly increases, right? Rapidly increases. Example, you see someone that you absolutely hate. You see someone that you absolutely despise. You're walking down the road. You're having a good day. Then you see that person, right? Just the hair of that person, what happens? Now your good day is ruined. Your entire life has come to a moment where you wish you were dead. Because you have come to this most inauspicious moment of coming into contact with this hag. Right? Now that is the proliferation of mind, where now your good day cease to exist just by this sign. Right? We are going to go into it in detail, but now you get the understanding of what the word proliferation means. Right? That is proliferation. That is important to understand. Moving on. Proliferation of concept and perception, conception and perception, right? This is to what does conception and perception, sanya and sankhara. Sanya, perception, sankhara is consciousness, right? When the mind would sort of now come into a situation of proliferation in sanya and sankhara. Now, turn to page number 95. Got it? Give me a thumbs up when you do. Yeah? Okay. Prapancha Sanya Sankha. Right? Translation problem. One of the most difficult passages in the Pali Canon is found in this sutta. That is, in connection with the term Prapancha Sanya Sankha, literally proliferation of concept and perception. But the exact translation of which remains conjunctural. We can take it to mean formation of countless ideas on account of much misdirected thinking. Now that is important. Misdirected thinking, right? This is also termed as, in Pali, Sanya Vipallasa, right? Sanya Vipallasa, I will come to it. The term appears only in a few places in the canon, mostly in the Madhupindika Sutta. Some attempts at translating the terms are listed here. Now let's see the translations. Venerable Jnanananda from Sri Lanka. Concepts characterized by the mind's prolific tendency. Again, concepts characterized by the mind's prolific tendency, right? John B. Ireland. Concepts that proliferate through perception. Concepts that proliferate through conception, through perception, right? Remember, we went through a sutta before where it mentioned, we went over, I can't remember which sutra it was, but we came to the fact that without perception, does consciousness exist? It does not. Without sanya, there is no perception, no consciousness. Consciousness, sanya, is a bypart of consciousness determined in, according to the Patthana, we could say that this is a anya manya paccaya, a mutual codependent law, where sanya, sankhara, vinyana all arise codependent on each other. So now this is to all the meditators, when you would try to get rid of sanya in your meditation, forget about it, never going to happen. It can't. It can't, right? Let's come back. Bodhi. Bodhi is Bhikkhu Bodhi. Perceptions and notions triggered by mental proliferation. Again, let's think about please think about the practicality of it in your own patterns of thought, not about anything else. Perceptions and notions triggered by mental proliferation. Then Bodhi again. Perceptions and notions born of mental proliferation. Perceptions and notions born of mental proliferation. Perception and notions triggered by mental proliferation was something that he has said in 1995. It would be interesting to know what his definition of it is now in 2020, right? Let's see. Then Analeo, which is Bhikkhu Analeo. Concoctions of proliferation and cognitions. Concoctions of proliferation and cognitions. Concoctions of proliferation and cognitions. Okay. Waldron, series of proliferation, apperceptions, series of proliferation, apperceptions. Then Piatam, proliferation of conception and perception, free translated, prolific, cognizing and recognizing. Actually, I love Piatam's one. I would say some of you might say, Bhante, you favor him, but actually his one to me makes the most sense, right? But let's explore it, right? It is, for me, I feel that it is John D. Ireland and Piatam's one, I feel, is most closest to what I feel is proliferation of mind, right? Let's go back to the sutra, page number 110, please. Right, page number 110. Give me a thumbs up when you're ready. All right. Now, bhikkhus, where did we stop? Okay, let's come down to mental proliferation as an unconscious process, right? As an unconscious process. Now, also, focus everyone, dependent on the I and form, I consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. Now, this is that voila moment. Damsari is already smiling. Damsari knows what's coming. Okay. with contact as condition, there is feeling. What one feels, one perceives. What one perceives, one thinks about. What one thinks about, one mentally proliferates. Okay. Now, prapancha, right? That is what this sutra is about. Prapancha is seen as, right, is the, as mentioned in the English translation, is proliferation of mind, right? To be more proliferation of conception and perception, right? Let's just call it proliferation of mind. Prapancha is known as tanha, ditthi, mana. Tanha is greed, tanha, ditthi, or rather craving. Ditthi is view, and mana is conceit, right? Craving, views, and conceit. Now put that aside, right? Have that as a note, but put that aside. Now, let's come to the practice. In your mind, when we talk about anything, now all of you focus, right? Stop reading your handout, stop writing your notes, This is very, very important, especially to everyone who meditates, Now, when we think about the proliferation of mind, we explain what is the proliferation of mind. Again, think about that hag you hate, right? In that similar concept, it is when your mind is now overwhelmed, saturated rapidly by perception and conception, right? A perception which can be anything. It can be tanha, it can be greed rooted, it can be hatred rooted, it can be delusion rooted, it can be something which is good and bad, right? The mind can be saturated in that way. Damsiri?
Yeah, when you say perception,
yeah,
not when you say conception, you are talking about the what's the word? Pali word for
Panyati.
panyati. Yeah, are you talking about panyati? Yeah.
Come to that.
Okay, all right.
Okay, all right. Proliferation of conception and perception. Let us just take it as mind, just for me to just pronounce it, but know that term. Now, when we have some sort of object which comes, which then proliferates the mind, fills the mind up so rapidly, right? You meditate, you meditate, you meditate. However, you have something that annoys you, you have something that draws your lust, you have something that deludes you. It comes up in your mind. What happens? Smack, your meditation is out of the room. You're back onto step one, right? That's how this proliferation kind of works. Similar, we know when you are in a state of absorption, jhanic absorption, similar things happen. When the hindrances arises, you lose your jhana absorption qualities and you come back smack into level one again when the hindrances arise. Why does now let us think about this. The meeting of the three. What is the three? Also dependent on the I and form and I conscious. The I and form and I conscious. I is pasada rupa, right? Which is the retina. The form is the rupa, the object, right? And I consciousness. Now let's stop looking at your handout, right? The retina, the object, and the I consciousness, which arises at the prasada rupa or the place where the retina is. Imagine that the way that happens now, almost all of you come to my Abhidhamma class as well. Now we are discussing this at the moment as well, right? We discussed how does sight arise, or how does an object of rupa, how is it produced or manifested? It is manifested when there is an object to see, a rupa, a form, when there is light, when there is attention, and when there is, what am I missing? And the
sensitivity.
And the eye sensitivity, right? When those four are there, the form is now able to be perceived, or form can now manifest. You can see. Now, if you take that, just imagine that happening. We have three causes now: the I, the form, and the I consciousness. It almost appears now the meeting of the three is contact. Imagine these three now coming together, right? And imagine in our minds, I feel like you and me would first think in the same way, which is how all these three things come together. We know that all of these are energies. So it is like a energy coming together, creating a spark. Now you know. Am I correct? Is that how many of you think? Right? Now, all of these things we know is energy, right? All the light that transfers is energy. The I pasada rupa is maintained by energy. Consciousness is an energy, right? This is all an energy. So then we would assume naturally that when all of these three components comes together, that there is a sort of a spark, and now you suddenly see. However, this moment of you perceiving that action. Now think about that moment of you perceiving that action of these three components coming together. At that place, is that the way? Now how would you verbalize it? I see, isn't it? Right? This is where I am able to see, I am able to hear, I am able to taste, I am able to feel, right? This is the existence of the I, right there. It is that perceival of when these three come together, that there is an I there. Now, when the light, the eye sensitivity, the form, and the attention appears, that appearing of those four circumstances is the I. It is perceived as the I when the mind watches. Now, when you are watching the breath, for example, now let's come to the meditation practice. When you are watching the breath, observing the breath, right? It is a long breath, for example. The long breath now changes to a short breath. The short breath continues for a bit, changes to a medium breath, or a long breath, or a very long breath, right? Or a short breath, or a shorter breath. Or in all of these situations, if you would close your eyes and just imagine, how did I perceive it? Now you're imagining this right now. How did I really perceive it? You perceived as my breath has now become this. My breath has now become that. My breath has now changed. It is always the breath within the breath, you see the existence of a representation of I. A representation of I. In that position, what then happens is that is where the mental proliferation is allowed to process. Right? The mental proliferation, it is at that point that it is allowed to process. What is the reason? What is the reason behind, or what are the conditioning factors? Now, let's come to the practical aspects. How is one able to now denote the mental proliferation? Now, up to this point, do people understand? Are there any questions? I feel like there should be questions, but then you don't know what the question is. I feel like. Pushpa?
Bande, can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
The earlier you explained that feelings followed by perceptions. Can the reverse also work? Like firstly the perceptions and then feelings.
With contact as condition, there is feeling. Passa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vinyana. Paticcasamuppada.
Yes.
The dissolution can happen in the other way, but the sort of the processing or the production of it happens always with the contact, feeling, and then Passa, Vedana, Sanya. Right? Because the Vedana, right, when there is a sort of feeling, that is when the perception to that feeling arises.
But also in the same time, okay, you can get the perception first, sanya, and based on the sanya, you can create feelings also, right? I'm just, because I remember Bhikkhu Jnanananda is explaining the other way. Like, I think it is in the Sammaditthi Sutta. It explains, 7 factors, including manasikara and things like that. So he says the perception starts first, then the feeling arises. I don't know. I mean, maybe. So what I was kind of thinking is maybe both can work, right?
Well, if we stick on to the Paticcasamuppada, the law of Paticcasamuppada, then there should be a problem there, isn't it? Right? Because now, how can we explain this? Okay.
I think both. Yeah, I know. I mean, if you go on the Paticcasamuppada route,
yeah,
the feelings first. There isn't it feelings and perceptions work together actually, because there's no perception separated in that Paticcasamuppada, 12 elements, isn't it? Maybe perceptions and feelings together, they explain.
No. Perception and feelings are not together. It is explained separately because it is two different mental factors altogether. Right? It is two different mental factors altogether. So it is explained separately. It is not explained together. Right? And in the flow of the Paticcasamuppada, the sensation, the feeling would arise before the sanya, right? But before sanya, right? So to assume that it can arise vice versa would be, it would be against Paticcasamuppada, right?
Bhante,
Yes.
Bhante, exactly same discussion we had yesterday with London Buddhist Vihara discussion. We were doing Mahavedalla Sutra. In Mahavedalla Sutra also, they say the sequence is Vedana, Sanya, and consciousness. Yeah. But it's again the reverse order. The consciousness should come first, right? I think what I think is because these cases actually, because they are occurring concurrently. These are Chaitasikas. Chaitasikas are occurring concurrently because we really can't differentiate whether this should follow the other. But I think we should consider it as a sort of, it's happening concurrently. I think the Vedalla Sutra explained that it's occurring actually concurrently.
Yeah. Now, the thing is now, although we might perceive, in our perceival, it is very difficult to perceive it in that way. We then use a concept to perceive it. But if we would take the Chaitasika Dhammas prepare the ground for the understanding, just as the Javanas would, right? And this is sort of somewhat like data collection, really, at this point, which allows for that sort of process of understanding karma and action to arise, right? So the factors of Vedana and Sanya, both being Chaitasika factors, in those processes will arise first, because that is what really enables for a whole image of a consciousness over the object to arise. Vedana, apart from Vedana, there is so much more to an object. If we would take the object, it is not only Vedana. The Vedana leads way to Sanya, where the Sanya is, how does this Vedana, how does this object apply to me, my life, how do I like it, do I not, whatever it is, the Sanya that we have over towards the object. So we could say, of course, it happen so fast. However, these are in ways sort of data collection processes, which we assume the data and we put it all together. in that process, the chitta will come, or we will assume the chitta, although it is a process of consciousness in every part, we assume the chitta, or we speak about the chitta coming afterwards to denote the fact of where that process of collection or data collection, or where all the data has been brought into the mind, is now able to be perceived. Where in that process of consciousness is where the true sort of development of karma exists, allowing for the rest of the processes to go on, for rebirth to happen. We'll move on. Yeah.
The other, can I add something? The you can actually look at two different levels. One is a microscopic level, where we look at in more sort of detailed Abhidharma method, and more macroscopic level, where you consider as Vedana, Sanya, and the consciousness is actually the cognition. So you need Sanya for complete cognition, right?
Yeah, I think I agree with that.
Yeah.
Anyway, if you
Yeah.
even refer to Samma Ditti Sutta also, if I remember correct, the Sutta, there also I think the perception comes before Vedana, which is feelings. But I think both ways are right. But as Bhante says,
Yeah.
when you're talking about the normal pattern of Paticca,
Yeah.
the Vedana comes first. Yeah, I think so. Anyway, thank you, Bhante. I think
Yeah.
we can move on. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So coming back to the sutta. Now, the meeting of the three is the contact. Now, again, right, this perceival of I within the proliferation of mind is what leads way to the arising of all that which we would proliferate the mind by. So whether now, how do we now, this is the we relate to, when it comes to proliferation of mind, we relate to a certain pressure, right? A pressure which exists within the mind, created by components of our conditioned cognitive practices, or practice of processes, conditioned cognitive processes, which allows for an object to be cognized the way it is, right? So when we would take an object, especially when now we are unable to stop the arise, when we are unable to stop sanya, we are unable to stop the concept. We need concepts to survive and live. As human beings, we need concepts, we need sanya to be able to live and do what we do. It is very much a part of our consciousness. However, so what then leads to proliferation is a question. If sanya, vedana, etc., these are parts of consciousness which will never disappear, so then what is it that leads to proliferation? That proliferation is said to be led by now this pressure. Remember, it mentioned which creates proliferation of mind, right? I told you to mark that sentence which mentioned that because as regards the source from which the proliferation and of conception and perception assails the mind. So what is this from which? From these things, the proliferation of mind occurs. What is that? That is the pressure which is created through these notions of tanha, ditti, mana. Where is tanha, ditti? Now, tanha, ditti, mana is created. Now, it is said, why does the five hindrances, right? The panchaskandha, right, becomes the pancha upadana skandha, the five aggregates of clinging. Because why? Of the concept of the conceptualizing of the five aggregates through the filter of it being yours, through saying that it is a part of me. We have gone through this in the Brahmajala Sutta. We have gone through this in the sutra that we did previously, right? As well, how the ego takes an object and we see ourselves in the object, or object a part of us, right? A part of us. How we sort of ravel with the object through the concept of I. Now in that, this I becomes, or that becomes the pressure which leads to an object being cognized and then leading to the proliferation of mind. Leading to the proliferation of mind. Did we get that? So because of our I factor, or because of our conditioned pattern of thought, which has ego conceit within it, we perceive something, a phenomena, which leads to prapancha, or that proliferation of mind. Got it? Right? That proliferation is created by, we know, because of the I that we have. That becomes the pressure which is put onto the mind, where now we take something with tanha, we take an object with tanha, ditthimana, or through the five aggregates. Through tanha. We'll just talk about tanha. That process, how do we now practically come to a position where we are now able to observe this process without leading to the arising of this prapancha? The example which is used within for a sangha is this. There is a person knocking at the door. One does not open the door for the person, neither does one shout at the person to go away. Yeah. One, again, the proliferation of mind has now come to the door. What? A person is at the door. He's knocking. You do not open the door, neither do you tell him, you do not engage with that object which causes proliferation. Then what happens? Where is this guy now? He will knock. But when he knows, okay, the door is not going to open, he goes away. That is the practice which has been taught, or which is actually known within for a sangha as how to deal with the proliferation of mind, how to deal with the proliferation of mind, or that which creates a proliferation, prapancha. This is also what we discussed in Chittanupassana, right? Where there is a mind which observes, the mind that is aware, and then there is a noting mind. The noting mind directly comes into contact with the object. But our duty as a meditator, or what we are supposed to do, knowing the Dhamma, knowing the arising and passing away of all phenomena, mind and matter, what we are supposed to do is not to entertain that which is an illusion. How does an object become illusion? Because look here, our mind is programmed to take everything as me, myself, and I. You can't tell yourself, this is not this is not that. That's not true. I've told you again and again, remember, I've told you, look here, we are not arahants, right? That's first important to understand. We are not enlightened beings. We learn the Dhamma and we say, okay, everything is impermanent, for example, right? Everything is impermanent. That's true. That is only true to arahants, not to us. Do you get what I mean? This is not to say that I am telling you that, no, this is permanent. No, I am talking about the practical understanding and application of wisdom upon an object. We learn the Dhamma, we learn the Jatakas, we learn the Dhammapada, we learn the Abhidhamma. Remember, these are the teachings. These are the teachings of the Buddha, which talks about a Arahanta mentality. Through the eyes of an Arahant, all of this is impermanent. All of it arises and passes away. But through the eyes of a mundane person, we know, right? Just as, for example, you know the right thing to do is to meditate. You know this, but it is very difficult for you to meditate, isn't it? Practically bringing yourself to actually see the arising, passing away is difficult. Why? Because this is somewhat like, for example, when there is a casino sign, right? The casino sign, you look at it and then you have it in your mind now, still it is a foreign object, right? But then when you look at it now and now it gets perfected, now it is as bright as the sun, then you can use it for the jhana. Now you get it. The wisdom that we have, the first step is recognizing, acknowledging the truth within that object. Right? Now we see in Buddhism, the core Buddhist teaching is Anitya Dukkha Anattma, impermanent, suffering, and non-self. We say impermanent, suffering, and non-self, but then you try to get your daughter married as quickly as possible. Or you are impermanent, suffering, and non-self. Impermanent, suffering, and non-self, but aiming for that big car. Or now you see, yes, we know it. It's not that we are being, it is not that we are being hypocrites. It is this play of what you know to be true and what you accept as true. We have accepted, yes, that might be true, but that but factor has created a different reality within us. Putting that reality aside and assuming that something is impermanent is not true impermanence to the mind. Acknowledging that fact, that is where this comes in now. Acknowledging that a phenomena is and can be impermanent, but observing, look here, we cannot understand impermanence to the normal cognitive ability of the mind. Why? It is conditioned. That is the same reason why a mundane person is unable to take the 8 Lokotara Chittas as object. We cannot even imagine what the Lokotara or the supramundane Chittas are, right? Because of that, what happens? We cannot take it as an object. Why? Because that level of perceivable is not amongst us. Why? Because we are conditioned. Conditioned by what? Conditioned by the Kama Loka, the sensual pleasures. That's why we are known as Kama Vachara beings. Sensual beings within the Kama Vachara plane, right? We are trying to see something beyond the fine material and the immaterial plane into the supramundane, which is far beyond our cognitive ability to do so. That what do? We realize, we see the impermanence within the fact. Now think about that guy who comes to the door. The guy comes and he knocks at the door. If you were to engage with the object, now what do you see? As soon as you hold the knob, open the door, you see the guy, the person at the door. When you are sitting down and not interacting with the object, what do you see? You see the arising. The guy comes, knocks, and he goes away. That is what you know. And that is all that you want to know in the perceivable of vipassana, in the perceivable of anicca dukkha anattma. Because when you interact with the object, when you interact with suffering, when you interact with non-self, you originate. For example, even if you take non-self, the moment that you interact with non-self, you give it a self. Why? What is a self? The I. You give it life. When you do not interact, that is why Anapanasati, all of you have practiced Anapanasati, breathing meditation. We know I have repeated, we've discussed breathing meditation. It becomes obvious, and it is easy for you to observe now the involuntary breath when you have let go on. When you are able to observe the breath without an emotional connection to the breath, without that emotional connection. Actually, there are parts of for a Sangha who define prapancha as emotional proliferation. Emotional proliferation. That is the definition that some of the Forest Sangha gives prapancha. Why? Because because essentially what you are trying to do is, look here, someone is knocking at the door. What you engaging with the object is having some sort of emotional attachment or connection to that object. Cutting off that attachment and connection, engagement with the object allows you to now observe the arising and the passing away of the object, which will give you now the ability to become the master of your mind. There is something which is pleasant. Now, you see, it is very easy. Now, let's look at the dark side of practitioners. It is very easy to talk about letting go when it is something which is something you are not emotionally attached to, isn't it? Right? It is very easy to tell a person, to tell another person, oh, it's impermanent. Why? It's not your problem, right? But if now you have, for example, lost a loved one, and someone comes and tells you, right, it's impermanent, which often the Sri Lankan and Asians do. Of course, it's impermanent. That's the reason I'm crying here. Don't rub it in even more, right? But now see, when there is an emotional attachment, right? That is remember the Venerable Panya, he said, Sri Panya, he said, yes, it is very easy to be compassionate. But when you have to open your wallet and give some money to be compassionate, now I'll see you later. There you see, in the same way, that's the same thing. When that emotion is there, that is when your true practice exists. That is when you practice awareness, where now through that awareness you are able to achieve a state. It is in the difficult, when you're meditating, your body is hurting. If you change every time your body starts to hurt, you will not be able to tap into higher states of consciousness. Why? Because you going through the pain, telling yourself, no, I am not going to give up, I'm going to go through this pain, is you cutting off that emotional connection. Cutting off the ability of that object to proliferate your mind. That is what it has done. You have been sitting in one posture, right? We know now parts that really hurt is the shoulder, right? The shoulder. Sometimes, I don't know if you've experienced, maybe you have, sometimes it hurts so much, you think you're just going to explode. But then you tell yourself, no, I'm not going to react. I'm not going to give in. What happens? The moment that you let go, it just disappears. Split second. It's no longer there. It's no longer there. Where? What happened? That object which proliferated your mind, when you cut it off. Now you are in samadhi, or you are in a state far more peaceful, just in a split second. If your shoulder was really hurting, it should have really been there. It couldn't have gone away. Proliferation of mind. In that way, as we go through, we come into a position, a state where we are actually able to, excuse me, I forgot to plug in my computer. Sorry, hold on. Almost lost you all there. All right. All right. So that is the proliferation that we attempt to see through the eye, through the ear, through the nose, through past, future, and present smells, the tongue and taste, and the tongue and taste, with regard to the parts of the body, with regard to the objects that we cognize. Because why? We've spoken about this. You, with all the professions that you have, through all the experiences of life that you have, through all the views that you know to be true and false, all of this has been gained through these doors, through these different objects that you have taken in. Understanding in past, future, and present the non-existence of the I factor, which allows this drain of proliferation to come into your life, enables you to control it. Enables not control. It does not, it ceases to have a power over you, right? Okay, we'll go into questions. We'll stop with the sutra there. We are going to continue from the ear-based proliferation onwards, right? So questions. Nathan, you have a question.
Hi, Bant. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
In regards to perception, this might be a silly question, but with perception, does it mean like what you visually see, or is there like a deeper meaning when it comes to, you know, the
Perception? Yeah. So perception, the mental factor of perception, refers to how the mind would perceive that which is presented at the five sensory doors and the mind. So the 6 doors, right? The 6 doors. So how would we perceive? That perceival is applicable to those objects that we derive from any of the 5 sensory doors or the mind door, right? Where does this sanya arise from, or how do we know how to perceive these things? These things we take in. That is why it is said babies, right? Even at the time that they are in the womb, they're learning, right? Why? Because they are rather empty in terms of their perception. They keep on learning so fast. We have so much of stuff in our minds cramped up already. Moreover, actually more than the cramping up, more the established perceptions that it is often difficult for us to relearn something. We want to learn through or have perceptions through the already existing perceptions, right? That is the reason why the Buddha relates to monks who have ordained at a age when they are mature in their years. What is the word in Pali? Does anyone remember? I can't remember that word, but it refers to, there's a word in Pali which says this is a person who has ordained after they have reached maturity, right? Meaning 50, 60, actually probably after 50 would be when the term would be used. And it is said such a person has to be strictly under the care of a teacher. This is not for any other reason. The fact that they come in with a lot of perceptions that have been established, right? So Nathan, I don't know if I've answered your question or gone off the route, but did I give you some sort of an answer?
Yeah, so like just to confirm what you said, it's to do with like the like all what you sort of the sensual feelings, basically what you hear, see, and what the information you process through that. Or am I
No,
wrong?
actually, no. Not,
Okay.
not what you hear, smell, taste. This is the essence that you derive through what you hear, smell, taste. And that conditions the mind. It is as if, for example, you have been hurt by a very close friend of yours, for example, because of which now you have issues trusting. Now your perception, your sanya has now been altered because of an experience through the mind, body, the sensual, the sensory perceptions, right? Through what objects you receive through the sensory perceptions. Now that is an alteration of sanya. You met with an accident. Now you have some sort of PTSD. Now you are afraid to walk on the road. What has happened? That experience has now altered your sanya, your perception, right? So perception is rather the way that our mind has accumulated this data and how our mind rather is conditioned by that accumulation of data, right? And that we use as a scope to view the objects that we have. Right now, a part of sanya is yoniso and ayoniso manasikara. Right, we have yoniso, which is right attention, and ayoniso manasikara, which is wrong attention. Yoniso manasikara and ayoniso manasikara conditions the way that we would handle an object. This yoniso and ayoniso manasikara is now, for example, my good is different to the good of each and every one of you. Your good is different to my good. Why? Because of the sanya. Why is the sanya different? Because of the experiences that we have taken in. Right? So in that way, that is what we refer to as perception. Right? Perception. But remember, perception is not final decision, is not the final decision. Right? Perception is rather a way of seeing the object, is rather the way of seeing the object, rather than the final decision. Remember, the final decision is where, after the javanas, that is when you have really got to know the object. So sanya is not your final decision. It is just the direction, the route by which you would continue to get to know this object. Yeah, Nathan?
Because I figured that was conception, and now actually when you say that, so then what is conception, if you don't mind me asking? Because I thought conception was what you explained right now, and so what would conception be in terms of the suit?
Well, conception here, which refers to sanya, is actually consciousness as a whole.
Yeah, and the difference would be with conception and perception.
That's the whole Abhidhamma lesson.
Oh, okay.
That is a whole lesson of Abhidhamma, right? Between what vijnana is and what consciousness, what mental factors and consciousness are. But no, for now, Nathan, just know that conception refers to the whole play, while perception refers to a part of it, right? But perception is what allows one to visualize a whole object.
Yeah.
Right? Now, because it is because of the perception that you are able to build a whole concept. Yeah?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it is because of that sanya that you are able. Now, for example, now the Buddha related to Dhamma. Some of the people attained Nibbana, while many actually did not. Right? That is because the fact of the reason behind that is because the difference in the sanya. What data are we managing this day with this new object by? Right? That level is what led to the concept that we derive, or the ability to get rid of those concepts differ through that. Yeah, we'll go more into it next time, Nathan. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you.
Samantha.
Oh, can you hear me, Bante?
Yes, yes, Samantha.
Yeah, I was just wondering, that that suit, the simile of the two bamboo sticks, with by Venerable Sariputta, the Nama Rupa explanation. Does that fit in here anywhere? And if so, what exactly is the simile? Because I remember vaguely.
The simile where the bamboo sort of relies on one another to stay up. Yes.
Yes,
I
that's
think
the one.
didn't we go through that simile last sutta or last Abhidhamma lesson?
Oh, I wasn't here.
Yeah. Anyways, no. That does that apply here? Does that apply here? Not really. It doesn't. I mean, you could apply it in some way for sure, but not directly, Samantha. Right? Not directly. Because we are actually going into a deeper part of Dhamma than what that simile is used for. That simile is relating to the Nama and the Rupa. Right? Whilst this is relating to the cause for attachment based or tanha ditthi mana based cognizing. So it is far deeper. The topic of prapancha goes deeper than the connection of nama and rupa.
Prapancha, right? Okay. So that prapancha, I mean, before the prapancha, you have that the nama rupa first has to kick in, isn't it? And what exactly is the bamboo simile anyway? What is it trying? Because isn't there a consciousness separate from the awareness or something?
Okay. The bamboo simile was actually at the Chittanupassana, wasn't it? Where we,
the writing and the passing.
Yeah. The bamboo simile speaks about the interdependence of that which is material and that which is mental. How based on that interdependence, one would be able to observe, be aware of a certain phenomena. Right? Yeah. And how dependent upon that connection, one is now able to observe. That is what the bamboo simile speaks about. Yeah?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So is the consciousness separate from the awareness?
That's a big question, Samantha. The consciousness is separate. The consciousness is, if we use the word consciousness relates to nama. Nama is the whole collection, which includes everything that we've been speaking about.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So what you are literally asking me then is, within this, is this there? Yes, it is. It is within it. Right? But so we have to be more specific then, Samantha. Because awareness is a part of consciousness. Without awareness, right, consciousness cannot take and stick on to an object.
Yes.
Without awareness, which is sati, right, we are unable to know an object. How are we supposed to? I don't have attention. Yes. When my sati, what happens when the sati is weak? When awareness is weak? Restlessness. Restlessness happens. What happens when restlessness happens? You are unable to base yourself upon any decisions. You're not able to, you're always moving around. You're always sort of, touching different things, whatever it is. You're moving from one object to another very fast without indecisiveness happens.
Yeah.
Okay, Samantha, we'll revisit that. Yeah, we'll revisit that. We are going to be revisiting all of those.
Lovely, thank you.
Any other questions? It was a bit of a taxing session, yeah, today.
Ante, can I ask a question? This prapancha concept can also used in Vedananupassana, right? When you are contemplating on Vedana, right? So you try to contemplate on Vedana as just a feeling, but not as Sukha Vedana or Dukkha Vedana or that sort of thing. So it's by doing that, you can actually dissolution. You can come for a dissolution of um, uh, what is that? Sankhara. Vedana is also part of the sankhara.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the beginning, when we start, we
Yeah.
allow meditators to observe the different Vedanas in terms of Sukha, Dukkha, Adukkama Sukha, or Sukha, Somanasa Sukha, Domanasa Dukkha, Adukkama Sukha, or Upekha. Right?
Mhm.
We would go into the 5 or 3 categories of Vedana,
Mhm.
right? Pleasant, unpleasant, and
Yeah.
pleasant, unpleasant. As we progress along, right, the thing is finding the balance where you know something is pleasant, where you know that something, an object is being cognized as pleasant, but not integrating or personalizing that object which has been taken in as pleasant.
Mhm.
That's the position that we come to or get to, right? For
Yeah.
example, I think, have you ever tried to hammer a nail and hit your hand or finger? I think all of us have, haven't we?
Yes. I have signed already.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And when you are a meditator, when you are, or sometimes when you sort of sometimes hit your thumb or your toe, not your thumb, your toe on like a side of a wall or a table or something, and it really hurts. And when you are a meditator and this pain arises, you can observe the pain, how, especially if you hit your sort of thumb with a hammer, you can sort of feel it like expanding and contracting, right? You feel that sensation
Okay.
in Vedana.
Yeah.
Now, what happens? Now you know that there is pain, but there is no reaction, right? Now, some people might understand if anyone has tattoos, right? I don't think anyone has. Wrong crowd. Maybe if you all got a tattoo those days, you won't be this way, you see. All right. So, it is somewhat like that. Where you are able to, where there is a pain or a somanasa feeling. However, you do not recognize with it in a way where it goes to an intimate level where you are now reacting to it in a way that it is now personal and a part of you. That is a strength that we try to develop through the Vedanapasana. Right? In Chittanupassana, it is a bit different because the Chittanupassana object is more subtle and not based upon Rupa. In Vedanapasana, it is based upon Rupa. So the object is a bit grosser, if that is even a word, right? It's gross, right? So we start off with whatever sensations, but we move on to a position where then we know the sensation for what it is, yet we do not interact with it in a way that it is now something that we take personally. That is a skill that we develop through.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we will continue next week. I think it's a very interesting sutta. Dil, you want to say something?
No, Ajahn Amaro explains it that unentangled participation.
Yeah. Unentangled participation.
So you don't go and you don't either push it away or you take it, but you're in the stage of just observing it only. So he says you're participating because you're seeing it, because they're seeing it, not that they're you. They're seeing it, but you don't get entangled in it to either pull it in or to push it up.
Somehow I feel like the usage of the word participation there somehow hints at some way at the back of our minds, hints at a way of actually participating. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but he doesn't consider it like I'm doing it. He says, like seeing.
Yeah. It is right in concept. It is right in concept, of course. Yeah. It is in a position where you are able to observe something without your participation or interaction with that specific object. Of course. Right. All right. So then we'll close the session for today. 8.
Call in a minute. Okay.
Bante, can I just add one thing?
Yes.
Relating to the first two questions.
Yes.
I don't know whether this will confuse the audience, but we were talking about sanya, consciousness, and awareness. I think sanya, vijnana, and prajna is lining up in kind of in one line. Sanya and all these things are kind of awareness and knowing, functions of knowing at different stages. Sanya, basically, what I have heard is that very subtle level of knowing, and then vijnana is knowing better, and prajna is knowing actual situation. So I think it's like
that can't be.
sanya,
That can't be, Ananda. That cannot be. That.
Uh-huh.
But continue. Please finish the point.
Yeah. So now, when you talk about awareness, it is knowing very well and as it is. So I think that probably can be the awareness. The real proper awareness with prajna. I don't know, because I have heard these three words together: sanya, vijnana, and prajna. Yeah.
No, that cannot be, because if we are to take the teachings on Abhidhamma, that is completely out of the question, right? It is a process, of course. It is a codependent process which enables a person to truly understand. If we are to sort of separate it in that way, look here. If there is an object, if we are to perceive an object in that way, where you have understood and then you understand more, and then there is a concept of I within that description. What is that which understands? Here, it is a process of a combination process which allows for a certain phenomena to be manifested. It is a manifestation, not where you sort of go through a book and you're jotting down points. Now you have a book of notes and now you understand. It is not that. It is a manifestation which is allowed by all these components doing what it is supposed to do. Awareness sati is the one to advert to an object at a level where now that person is able to know or stick on to that object, which allows the mind to work with that object. It is in every part a combination. I have never heard, and it is in the law with the foundations of Abhidhamma, that would not sit well with that concept of growing understanding with vijnana or sanya or sankhara. Ananda.
Yeah, Bante. Yeah, I totally understand. No, what I'm saying is, but for an ordinary person, just to understand the basic differences of these terms, the words, like what is the difference between perception and consciousness, and prajna and things like that. So I mean, you can just think of those lines. I mean, it doesn't mean that these words are the same. Of course, in Chaitasikas, 52 Chaitasikas, these are different. This has a very precise different meaning. But what I'm saying is that if someone wants to understand that way, so I have heard like that. So maybe it may not be relevant here. Anyway, just
thank you. Ananda. Thank you. Samantha, yes, awareness comes under sankhara. So thank you, everyone. And we will see. I will put up the recording tonight itself so that you can revisit it as soon as possible. I think you will need to revisit this talk. So I will put up the recording on YouTube. So if anyone wants to revisit it. So thank you, everyone, for coming. And thank you for all of Devika's friends who have also joined in. So take care and good night, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, Bante. Good night. Good night.
Good night.